Often we talk about, how people talking about recently about the future of work and how work is changing, and particularly obviously with COVID even more so, people are working remotely. But I know we've spoken about it before in a different context, that like in the same way, and it's often forgotten about, the future of IT administration is changing and has been changing over the last decade since myself and you have joined the Google ecosystem. But IT admins now are having to manage people and devices in different locations, and that's a huge challenge. And I know we have conversations with customers all the time about these types of challenges now. How do you feel tools like Patronum help IT administrators with, staff working remotely and those kinds of newer challenges that they have?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I'm more approached with this hybrid working that people are talking about. For me, if you've got an individual that's working remotely or in the office, it goes back to the automation. It goes back to provisioning the individual with the same services, the same security, the same Google Groups, the same files that they would have in the office. Because what would have happened in the past, somebody would have sat down at a desk, they wouldn't have been able to gain access to a particular file because they weren't put in the right Google Groups, for example, and they'd be turning to the colleague and say, have you got access to that? And they just go, I'll share it with you. And so that kind of one-to-one indiscreet collaboration was happening in the office. It was happening over the water cooler effect and those kind of things. Whereas now, if you are working from home, you don't have the people to talk to immediately. And so you can feel a little detached from the organisation if you're not provisioned correctly. So tools like Patronum, I think, are more essential now with the correct onboarding of users. Making sure that you have a policy in place from a Patronum perspective that dictates what Google Groups you're going to be a member of based on what you're going to be doing. And if that can be configured and set up in advance, then everybody has the same feature set, everybody has the same experience, regardless of whether or not they're in the office or working remotely. And so, you don't have to have that one-to-one conversation with somebody that you sat next to gain access to things. You just gain access to them because you've been provisioned correctly.
Yeah, and I think with Google, the kind of, you're always remote working, and that the solution isn't a server or isn't, even as you said, even with Office 365 and tools like that, how they think about security is still very much the moat, the sort of build a firewall around it and keep everything inside. And I think Google is such that it doesn't really matter where you're connecting to it. The security is the same, Google's context-aware access and things like that. And I think the other piece for me is the offboarding, that when you put in place policies in a tool like Patronum, you do take one action and all of the other actions now come after that. So you place the user in a particular group, the ex-employees group or whatever, or organizational unit. I always forget what they're called. And then it sets off a series of...
it's a chain of events based on, inside Patronum we have what we call emergency offboarding. Right. So if you've got somebody that you absolutely need to get rid of off the system immediately from a security perspective, you can do that. Alternatively, we have a end date. So if you've got contractors, you can terminate them at the right time. So our policies run. They run at after work hours on that particular date. It's all about making sure that things are being done in a structured way that is predictable and programmatic from a onboarding offboarding perspective.
Great. And I'm kind of interested in, like we spoke about the future of IT admins. Where do you see that developing over the next few years in terms of the tools? What types of features do you feel, or if you were to kind of think about where we would be in 5 or 10 years, what do you kind of see?
I think some organisations are going to start looking at where AI can take place or can have an impact on IT operations. There's a lot of conversations around hyper automation where you would want to automate more than just onboarding and offboarding, but you want to automate certain aspects of an IT process, whether that's filling in a form or doing certain tasks. If you've got AI that's watching how an IT administrator is doing their day-to-day job, the AI will eventually be able to predict the response to certain tasks. And so if that response can be predictable in a particular fashion and to a particular accuracy, then quite a lot of those tasks can be offloaded to an AI engine to then make business decisions, not just based on in the realm of Petroleum, which is a black and white type of it's yes or no kind of response, but it's more nuanced than that. So you'd want the system to be able to do certain things based on an understanding of how things have been done previously. Yeah, so I can see tools getting into that kind of
sort of cleverness. And we've that built-in intelligence, and we've seen that probably to a degree with certain things with Google, where like their security systems are seeing this person's connecting from this IP address, and I don't recognize, and that's a device I don't recognize, like the context-aware access. I'm going to lock them out. Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of in intelligent design built into it, and I think. Yeah, we'll start to see that more and more in the IT admin level. It's almost like it's at the end user. It's moving its way up.
Yeah, but I think it's more to do with where is it going to be useful. People talking about automation and talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning and all the patterns that are available from an IT administrative perspective. It really is the data there yet? And so I think we're in the position now where we're able to collect the data. And so as we then start to get more and more data, we can then start to analyse what does an IT administrator do on a day-to-day basis, and how can a lot of that be automated beyond just the simple automation that the likes of Petroleum's doing today.
The more, as you said, black and white type scenarios. And talking about Petroleum, can you tell us about any of your sort of near-term or long-term plans over the next year or 5 years?
Yeah, would love to. So, short-term, we're really focusing on Google Drive as a kind of like next area of automation. So we've been spending a lot of time looking at customers' usage of Google Drive. We're currently caching a lot of Google Drive information, Google Drive metadata. So the first thing that we're going to come to market with, which we've already released to a number of customers in a kind of a closed beta, is our Google Drive sharing function. And so what this will show you is who has access to our data. So I can have a look at it from an internal perspective, can have a look at it from an external perspective. We can also say who is looking at our data from a gmail.com point of view. So sometimes if you share a document with somebody who's not on Google Workspace, heaven forbid, they have the ability to allocate that to a gmail.com account. And so we see quite a lot of company data being shared with Gmail, consumer accounts. And for me, that's a big security risk. So the first thing that we will be doing with the data that we're collecting is building policies so that an administrator or an organisation can turn around and say, we're happy for our users to share this data with gmail.com accounts because we need to get the work done. However, we don't want it to be done indefinitely. So after a period of time, why don't we just notify the user to say, do you realise that you're still sharing this data with X, Y, and Z? We're already, as I mentioned, we're already caching this data. And so some of the features that we're providing is a search of Google Drive as well. So imagine going back to my days as a Novell engineer, I was able to look at a file server and I could see every single file on that file server. Move 10, 20 years forward, can't do that with Google. You can't see the file system as a whole. So that's what we've done with Petroleum. So we're caching the files, we're caching the file names, we're caching the file IDs. So now you can search for files of everybody. You could also search for file ID. So a classic example is you've shared a file with a colleague. That colleague has maybe left, or they owned the file and they've left, and part of the offboarding process was to move their data to somebody else. Now, it might not be a genuine user. You might have an archive account, which is a common approach. That archive account's email is not read. So I've now got access to a file. Well, I don't have access, I have the link. So when I click on the file, it says, would you like access to this file? You say, yes, please. Yeah. And it just goes off into a black hole.
Yeah, an email address that nobody looks at.
Absolutely. So now I'm sat there thinking, when am I going to get access to this file? I need to contact IT support. IT can't find it unless they look in the archive logs and stuff. Patronum comes in, you do a search for the ID. Boom. We can tell you exactly who owns the file. It's the archive account. Short click, we can give you access to that particular file, or change ownership so that somebody more appropriate can gain access. So that's our kind of first step into the Google Drive area. I'm quite excited about that. People, like I said, people are already using it and they love it.
And I think the thing as well, because of shared drives, which formerly was known as team drives, because of that additional feature or tool within Google Drive, way more companies are using Google Drive now. Absolutely. In a way, I mean, like companies used it before, but using it for all of their corporate documentation. We've had so many migrations over the last couple of years where we're moving customers' data off a server and into shared drives and fully into the cloud, and they're just getting rid of their in-house server. And that, to me, is amazing, because 5 or 10 years ago, that couldn't have been imagined. Do you know what I mean? Trying to do that before. I remember there was other tools that sat on top that tried to,
AO Docs, for example.
AO Docs was one. There was another one with name escapes me now.
Loom Docs, Loom Apps.
There's a Loom Apps one. There's a whole bunch of them that sort of tried to fix that problem with My Drive, where it wasn't the server in the cloud that you kind of wanted it to be. And Shared Drives has just solved that. And so many customers have just gone in. But now they're in the situation of you're talking about, where all their data's in there.
They're oversharing.
Yeah. How do I manage it? How do I know who's sharing what with whom? How do I take control of other files, as you say, if somebody's left? So I think there was gaps in the IT management, and we often see that, don't we? Where like a tool jumps ahead, the users dive in, and then IT are like, "Oh, hang on a second, we need to be able to manage this." And I think that's what happened there. Which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the areas that we're trying to resolve is the, as you mentioned, the oversharing.
That's an interesting feature we're talking about.
You've been working in your team drive or your shared drive, and you've collaborated with another company. Maybe you've collaborated with an outsourced multimedia organisation. You've shared all your content with them, and then you decide to switch to a different company. Yeah. How do you go through every single file in your system and say, we don't want these guys to have access anymore? Yeah. And it's not the fact that you've just shared it with a group and you can just pull it back in. It's Charlotte shared a file, you've shared a file, Dawn shared a file. Other people, in your organisation have started sharing files with different people in this other organisation, and it's just you are just oversharing. Yeah. So with Patronum, we've now built in so that you can go in, type in the domain name, and it will show you every single file that that organisation has access to. You can just click a button and say unshare. So as you move from one company to another, from a collaboration perspective, you can bring that data back into the organisation.
And I think that's the power of the cloud as well, has been able to maintain control of your data. We often used to get it with customers where they didn't understand that sort of cloud-based sharing, and they were like, "Oh, I much prefer just sending it as an email attachment."
Which is
that's just you just sent them a full copy of the file. You can never take that back completely. But I think that conceptual switch hadn't happened 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that's interesting. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining us, Paul.
Thank you.
We really appreciate your time. Thanks very much for also you guys joining us. If you're interested in Patronum, we will link to it below, whether that's on down here, whether that's on LinkedIn or YouTube or Twitter or wherever you're watching. If you are not, please do remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on LinkedIn, where a lot of our content is shared. That's it from us, guys. We will see you next week.